Since 1992, the United States and our allies have stood together for a denuclearized Korean peninsula. We hope to achieve this objective through peaceful means, but all options are on the table. Just in the past 2 weeks, the world witnessed the strength and resolve of our new president in actions taken in Syria and Afghanistan. North Korea would do well not to test his resolve or the strength of the armed forces of the United States in this region.
We're prepared for anything. We are so prepared like you wouldn't believe. You would be shocked to see how totally prepared we are.
As our Secretary of Defense made clear here in South Korea not long ago, we will defeat any attack and we will meet any use of conventional or nuclear weapons with an overwhelming and effective response. Over the past 18 months, North Korea has conducted 2 unlawful nuclear tests and an unprecedented number of ballistic missile tests, even conducting a failed missile launch as I traveled here for this visit. The era of strategic patience is over.
Make no mistake, any attack on the United States or our allies will be defeated.
예, 분명히 말씀드리겠습니다. 미국이나 우리 동맹국에 대한 그 어떤 공격도 격퇴될 것입니다.
Any use of nuclear weapons by the North will be met with a massive military response, effective and overwhelming. North Korea has accelerated the threat that it poses to its neighbors in the world through its illegal and unnecessary missile and nuclear weapons programs.
북한은 불필요한 미사일과 핵실험을 통해서 전 세계 국가들에게 가하는 그 위협을 점점 더 그 속도를 가속화시키고 있는 상황입니다.
It engages in outlaw behavior, threatening behavior condemned by unanimous UN Security Council resolutions. Phil, I cannot imagine, in light of Kim's expanded outlaw activities that the world's experienced, observed over this last year or two, I cannot imagine a condition under which the United States would accept North Korea as a nuclear power. We must recognize the reality that this is a regime, a Kim regime, north of the DMZ, that threatens peace and stability, and certainly directly against the people of the ROK. So our combined effort is to deter that sort of threat, or to have military options, many different military options, that would realistically reduce that threat as low as possible. And yes, we do have those options.
And Vice President Pence made a pointed visit to Minot Air Force Base in North Dakota, home to nuclear bombers and missiles.
Anyone who would threaten our nation should know that America always seeks peace. But if we are forced to defend ourselves or our allies, we will do so with military power that is effective and overwhelming.
If you look at it from the North Korean perspective, they have always believed that nuclear weapons would be the key to peace and stability in this region by preventing the United States from, in their view, bullying them. They feel if they can prove they have an effective nuclear deterrent, then perhaps the U.S. will try to talk instead of trying to impose sanctions and making military threats. But the real fear and the growing fear is that if North Korea actually goes through with this kind of a nuclear test, which does seem increasingly likely, the results and the response from the United States, unknown.
No hollow threat. A senior North Korean official has warned the U.S. that it should take Pyongyang's threat of setting off a hydrogen bomb literally, telling CNN that the country has always backed its words with action. Referring to Foreign Minister Lee Yong-ho's remarks last month in New York, when he said the regime would set off an H-bomb in the Pacific, The official said Lee is very well aware of Kim Jong-un's intentions. The official also implied that diplomatic channels between the U.S. and North Korea are non-existent, despite U.S. Secretary of State Rex Tillerson's recent insistence that they are still open. He also said Washington is deeply mistaken if it thinks talking about a military option and even practicing such moves along with sanctions will lead to a diplomatic resolution. North Korea's H-bomb threat was made shortly after President Trump's now famous speech at the UN, where he said the U.S. would, quote, totally destroy the regime.
Flying into the North Korean capital, life on the surface seems normal. Beneath the surface, it's anything but. Overseas North Korean workers are being sent home in droves, their jobs eliminated by UN sanctions. The U.S. calls it punishment for an illegal, dangerous nuclear program. North Korea calls it evil, an economic blockade. On my 16th trip to Pyongyang, I still see signs of growth, plenty of traffic, construction, a steady flow of electricity, keeping the growing skyline bright. But the prospects of a peaceful resolution to the nuclear standoff with the U.S. seem to be growing darker by the day. At North Korea's Ministry of Foreign Affairs, thank you so much. We asked to meet with a senior diplomat. Lee Yong-pil agrees to talk, but the mood is tense. His anger at the U.S. palpable.
Donald Trump said he would totally destroy North Korea, a sovereign state.
He's referring to the U.S. president's fiery speech at the UN last month when he personally insulted a fellow head of state.
Rocket Man is on a suicide mission for himself and for his regime.
North Korean leader Kim Jong-un fired back, calling President Trump's behavior mentally deranged. North Korea's foreign minister made a threat that alarmed even longtime Korea watchers.
This could probably mean the strongest hydrogen bomb test over the Pacific Ocean.
Some analysts have accused North Korea of bluster, saying they haven't yet achieved full nuclear capability. And if they go to war, they risk total destruction. But the North Koreans warn the U.S. not to underestimate their resolve and their growing arsenal.
Should the world prepare for North Korea to detonate a nuclear device above ground?
The foreign minister is very well aware of the intentions of our supreme leader, so I think you should take his words literally.
Let us begin with Washington's Defense Secretary's Seoul trip. Earlier, he visited the DMZ, where the nation is divided in two. Meeting his Korean counterpart, James Mattis placed extra emphasis on the importance of denuclearizing the out-of-control regime. Kim Hyun-bin has our top story.
U.S. Secretary of Defense James Mattis arrived in Seoul early Friday for his second visit as Pentagon chief. Mattis toured the frontline units with his South Korean counterpart Song Yong-moo and gave a strong message towards North Korea. The U.S. general stressed that Washington's goal is to denuclearize the regime.
Our goal is not war, but rather the complete, verifiable, and irreversible denuclearization of the Korean Peninsula.
Defense Minister Song made similar comments, urging Pyongyang to give up its nuclear ambitions.
I urge North Korea should halt its reckless provocations and come back to the negotiating table as soon as possible.
The U.S. defense chief's visit comes as South Korea and the U.S. are scheduled to hold their annual Security Consultative Meeting in Seoul on Saturday, a day after the Allies' military committee meeting. Friday's military committee meeting was led by the Joint Chiefs of Staff of the two allies, General Chung Kyung-do and General Joseph Dunford. Seoul's Defense Minister Song Yong-moo and Mattis will hold their official talks at the SCM on Saturday. The allies plan to have in-depth discussions on enhancing extended deterrence against North Korea's ever-expanding nuclear and ballistic missile threats. They are also expected to discuss alliance policies, including the early transfer of wartime operational control from Washington to Seoul, which is one of the key goals of the Moon Jae-in administration. Kim Hyun-bin, Arirang News.
U.S. and North Korean officials tell CNN diplomacy has broken down, pushing two nuclear powers dangerously close to military conflict.
The U.S. is talking about a military option and even practicing military moves. They're pressuring us on all fronts with sanctions. If you think this will lead to diplomacy, you're deeply mistaken.
So then I ask, what needs to happen for diplomacy to resume?
The The US needs to understand our new strategic power and fundamentally eliminate its hostile policy towards the DPRK.
He says North Korea's leader is following through on a pledge to reach a nuclear balance of power with the U.S., which they say will lead to peace and stability. Even as many around the world worry, the end result could be the exact opposite. If North Korea were to go through with this atmospheric thermonuclear test, it would be the first the world has seen in nearly 4 decades, since China did it back in 1980. But again, North Korean officials here reiterated this would only be a test to improve their technical knowledge, to send a message that they have this nuclear deterrent. They would not consider this an act of war. Again, in their view, nuclear weapons will guarantee peace, a view counterintuitive to much of the rest of the world who really worry what is going to happen. And then, of course, Michael and Emmer, the big question here, timing, with President Trump's visit to Asia happening in less than 2 weeks.
The brave men and women of Minot Air Force Base may yet be called upon to be the instruments of American power. And if that day comes, we know you will be prepared.
U.S. Vice President Mike Pence vowed to keep economic and diplomatic pressure on North Korea to make it abandon its nuclear and missile programs. While touring a nuclear weapons base in North Dakota, Pence said the U.S. will use overwhelming military power to defend themselves or its allies against attacks. Pence said America's enemies should never doubt the capabilities of the U.S. armed forces. Minot Air Force Base is home to dozens of B-52 bombers and ICBM sites and is the only U.S. base capable of conducting nuclear strikes by both planes and missiles.